No land in sight, just black ocean. In every direction. Endless, the waves are 3 meters high. The current is pulling everything south. The sky is dark with ash from a volcano that erupted 4 days ago. The water is freezing cold. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, clinging to a tangle of uprooted trees, soaking wet, starving, is a group of humans. They have no boat, no paddle, no map, no compass, no language complex enough to even describe what is happening to them. They don't know where they are. They don't know where they're going. They can't even be sure land exists on the other side. And yet, they made it. Over 1 million years ago, long before Homo sapiens existed, long before language, long before fire was fully controlled, an ancient human species crossed a stretch of deep open ocean that scientists once said was impossible for them to cross. We know this because in 2025, a team of researchers published findings in Nature confirming stone tools on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi dating back at least 1.04 million years. Sulawesi sits behind the Wallace Line, a deep ocean boundary, a stretch of water that never dried up, not even during the ice ages when sea levels dropped by over 100 meters and most of Southeast Asia became one giant landmass. To reach Sulawesi, something had to cross the sea, and the only candidate is us. Here is why this matters so much. For decades, scientists believed that crossing open ocean was beyond the cognitive and physical ability of early humans. It was considered a uniquely modern behavior, something that required complex planning, advanced tools, and high-level communication. The first accepted evidence of human seafaring used to be around 60,000 years ago when modern Homo sapiens reached Australia. That was already extraordinary. But Sulawesi pushes the timeline back by nearly 1 million years. 1 million years before us. The species that made those tools was almost certainly Homo erectus, a human ancestor that walked upright, made basic stone tools, and had a brain roughly 2/3 the size of yours. They had no written language, probably no complex spoken language either. Their tools were simple. Their world was brutal. And somehow, they crossed deep open ocean. The question that nobody can fully answer yet is the one that will keep you thinking long after this video ends. How? To understand what this crossing meant, you need to picture the world 1 million years ago. Southeast Asia looks nothing like it does today. During glacial periods, sea levels were dramatically lower, sometimes more than 120 meters below what they are now. This means that what are today the islands of Sumatra, Java, and Borneo were all connected. One enormous landmass, stretching south and east from the Asian continent, covered in dense tropical forest. Homo erectus was already living across this landmass. We have fossils from Java. We have tools from across the region. They were here. They had spread far and wide across what scientists call Sundaland, the exposed continental shelf that formed this ancient supercontinent. But Sulawesi was different. Sulawesi sits on the other side of the Wallace Line, a deep oceanic trench running between Borneo and Sulawesi that has existed for millions of years. Even at maximum glacial sea level drop, the channel between Borneo and Sulawesi remained open water. Deep, fast, and wide. The minimum crossing distance from the nearest land, even with sea levels 120 meters lower than today, was somewhere between 25 and 40 kilometers of open ocean. For context, 25 kilometers of open ocean, with no knowledge of what lies on the other side, in a world without any watercraft ever recorded, is not just difficult, it should have been impossible. And yet the tools are there, sitting in the rock. Dated, confirmed, undeniable, nobody planned this crossing. That much the scientists are almost certain about. Here is the most likely scenario, and it is more terrifying than anything you might imagine. Picture the coast of ancient Borneo. Dense jungle pushing right to the water's edge, a river delta where a group of Homo erectus, maybe 15 or 20 individuals, are living, fishing the shallow waters, eating fruit, sheltering in the tree line. Then the earth shakes. A massive earthquake. This region sits on one of the most seismically active zones on the planet, then as now destabilizes the coastline. The river floods violently, trees collapse into the water, whole sections of riverbank break away. And some of the group clinging to whatever they can reach are swept out with the current, not onto the open ocean immediately. First, they are pushed along the coast, riding floating debris, uprooted trees, tangled root masses, dense mats of vegetation torn from the jungle floor. They are terrified. They call to each other. They try to swim back. But the current is too strong. Hours pass. Then, a day. Then, 2. The current, the ancient predecessor of what we now call the South Equatorial Current, is pushing them east and south. Away from Borneo, toward open water. They have no food except what grows on the floating vegetation they're clinging to. The water they drink is rainwater caught in leaves. At night, the ocean is black and completely featureless. Some of them don't survive the crossing, but some of them do. And when land finally appears on the horizon, a dark ridge rising out of the ocean, the volcanic peaks of ancient Sulawesi, the ones who are still alive, do the only thing they know how to do. They swim toward it. Sulawesi in that era was not empty. It was an island world, unlike anything Homo erectus had experienced on the mainland. The evolutionary isolation of Sulawesi had produced creatures found nowhere else on Earth. Giant pigs. Dwarf elephants called stegodon, ancient relatives of today's elephants, but scaled down by island conditions to around the size of a large ox. Enormous tortoises, unique birds, and no other humans. For the survivors of that crossing, Sulawesi was simultaneously terrifying and abundant. No competing humans meant no territorial conflict, no group to fight for resources. But the hunting was completely unknown. Every animal behaved differently from anything they had encountered on the mainland. The landscape was volcanic, unstable, steep. The water sources were different. The plants were unfamiliar. They had to relearn almost everything. And yet, they survived. We know this because the stone tools we found are not just one or two scattered pieces. There are 7 confirmed tools from multiple layers of sediment at the Callao site, spanning a significant time range. These are not accidental arrivals who died immediately. These are people who lived, who made tools, who passed knowledge to others, which means in the most extraordinary implication of this entire discovery, they may have had children on Sulawesi. Raised a generation born on an island their parents arrived at by accident. A generation that had never seen the mainland. The first humans born on an island they had no idea existed a month before they got there. The tools themselves are deceptively simple. 7 stone flakes, carefully shaped. Some retouched, meaning the edge was deliberately reshaped after the initial strike, showing intentional refinement. One showed clear signs of use as a scraping or cutting tool. They are not impressive by modern standards. They would not look out of place as random rocks to an untrained eye. But to a paleoanthropologist, they are extraordinary. Because making these tools requires a specific understanding of how stone fractures. You have to strike at precisely the right angle, with precisely the right force, to produce a usable edge. You have to know which rocks will flake correctly and which will shatter uselessly. You have to hold the knowledge of toolmaking in your mind and execute it under pressure. This is not random. This is not accident. This is a being that thinks, plans, remembers, teaches, and the dating of these tools confirmed through both paleomagnetic analysis and uranium series dating of the surrounding sediment places them at a minimum of 1.04 million years old, possibly as old as 1.48 million years. For context, the first anatomically modern Homo sapiens would not appear on Earth for another 700 to 900,000 years after these tools were made. Whoever held these tools was not us, but they were something. Here is what makes this discovery genuinely shake the foundations of what we thought we knew. The Wallace Line was supposed to be an uncrossable barrier for any pre-modern human. It was named for Alfred Russel Wallace, the Victorian naturalist who observed in the 1850s that animals on the western side of the line were related to Asian species, while animals on the eastern side were completely different. The line represented a deep oceanic boundary that had kept these two biological worlds separate for millions of years. Scientists use this line as evidence that early humans could not have crossed to Sulawesi. The logic was simple: if even large land animals couldn't cross it, how could early humans? The Callao tools destroyed that logic completely. But what is even more stunning is what the tools imply about the cognitive abilities of Homo erectus. Even if the crossing was accidental, swept out to sea by a tsunami, or storm survival at sea for multiple days requires extraordinary physical and mental endurance. It requires group cooperation. It requires the ability to process fear, maintain hope, and make decisions under extreme stress. And there is another possibility that some researchers are beginning to seriously consider. What if it wasn't entirely accidental? What if Homo erectus had observed, over many generations of living on the coast, that things sometimes came from across the water? Logs, dead animals, birds flying in a specific direction. What if, over thousands of years, some cognitive map of there is something out there had begun to form? Not a plan, not a voyage, but an instinct. A hunger for the horizon that may have made them more willing to hold on when the current took them out. More willing to trust the direction the birds were flying. more willing to keep swimming when land finally appeared. That instinct that pull toward the unknown did not disappear with Homo erectus. It is in every human who has ever looked at the horizon and wondered what was on the other side. Think about what you do when you get on a plane. You sit down, you put your seatbelt on, you look at your phone, you eat a small packet of crackers at 35,000 feet above the earth, traveling at 900 kilometers per hour, and you think about what you are going to do when you land. You don't think about the miracle of it. You don't feel the distance. You don't register the fact that you are crossing an ocean. 1 million years ago, a group of human beings clung to a floating tree in the middle of the ocean and used every atom of strength and will they had just to stay alive long enough to see land again. They had no certainty, no map, no knowledge that survival was possible. They just held on. And because they held on, because a few of them refused to let go, we know that the drive to cross the ocean, to push into the unknown, to survive things that should have ended us, is not a modern invention. It is the oldest thing in us. Every explorer, every migrant, every person who has ever packed everything they own and moved to a place they have never seen, they are all carrying something that started on a floating tree in the Java Sea 1 million years ago. The ocean didn't stop us then. It never has. In 2025, researchers confirmed what the stone tools at Callao had been quietly saying for years. Ancient humans crossed the ocean before they had any business crossing it. Before boats, before maps, before language complex enough to describe what the other side might look like. They crossed it anyway. So here is the question that the science can't answer, and maybe never will. On that floating tangle of trees, somewhere in the dark ocean between Borneo and Sulawesi, 1 million years ago was there a moment when one of them looked at the others and somehow without words communicated something that meant, hold on, keep going, we are going to make it. And if there was, what does that say about us?